welcome back to part 2 of our story. My name is Lisa, and we bought a house for $101, and I'm in the process of explaining how it is that we bought that house for $101. A lot of our videos are going to be about us fixing it up, because obviously if you buy a house for $100, it probably needs some work, and this one needs a lot of it. So I have been doing that, but I wanted to focus on what everyone wants to know. How on earth did you buy a house for $101? And so I gave the backstory in my first video, kind of about how we found the house and how it is something that could actually be salvaged. I mean, you see some of these stories. I know some of the cities that I looked at, they will sell you a house for like $1, but no one wants to live anywhere near that house because the neighborhood is bad and the house is literally crumbling. And so I thought maybe that would be the case with this particular house, but it was not. So it was something worth pursuing, and we found that out. Obviously, it's the first step of buying the house, was to find out that it was indeed salvageable and was something that we could feasibly, with some effort, live in. All right, so part 2 of this story. We picked it up with the house was going for an auction, but first had an open house. And the day before the open house, my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, father-in-law, and I got a sneak peek of the house. So the next day was the day after Easter in April of 2019. So 4 of us had seen it, but there's a lot of other people in our family. So the next morning, the open house was at 10 a.m. And my mother-in-law definitely wanted to go. She hadn't gone to the first one. And my kids wanted to go, and there'd been a lot of talk about the house when we got back from our sneak peek, and whether or not we wanted to get it, what would it be worth, is it worth it? Everybody wanted to see the house. My kids wanted to go, my niece and nephew wanted to go, a couple of my sister-in-laws were also visiting, and some live here in the area. Everybody wanted to go see the house. Now, I knew that if there was any chance of buying a house that needed a lot of work, that I needed my husband's approval. I couldn't just go buy a house that needed a bunch of work and expect to live in it myself. Now, granted, I'm doing a lot of the work, but there's a lot of things that I couldn't do, or if nothing else, I needed financing for, and I needed my husband to say, yeah, I'm on board with this. And if you're married, it's always good to get your husband's input and approval before making such a big decision, like buying another house that you might move into and needs, hours and hours of work to it. So I kind of knew that I had to get his approval in order to move on to the next step. But I knew there was no way that he would approve of buying it, or at least I didn't think he would, if he didn't see it. And he hadn't been interested in seeing it the day before. And so my big prayer request that morning of the open house was, God, please help him to want to come see the house. Because that was kind of one of my ways of knowing that maybe God wanted us to buy the house, was would my husband see it? Because we'd actually kind of looked at a few other houses. Actually, 10 years ago, we put an offer on a house, and I wouldn't put the offer on the house. He wanted the house, but he didn't even go look at it. My husband is unique, and I love him to pieces, but sometimes I question some of his decisions, So that morning, it was time for the open house, and my husband's a farmer. It was April, and he did not want to go to an open house. He wanted to go work in his fields, which again is a good thing, and you can't fault him for that. If you say too much, then he really won't ever want to be interested in the house. So I couldn't say too many things, but I did pray pretty hard. And the open house again started at 10 a.m. and about 9:45 that morning, guess what? It started raining. So my husband relented and said, okay, I'll go to the open house, but only for a few minutes, so don't expect to stay there long. So we went to the open house, and we had to have probably made people look really, what's going on here? Because here we converge or whatever. We just show up at this house, and we have like 3 cars of people, and all the kids got out and running around picking out their bedrooms where they would live. And at this point, we hadn't decided to buy it. And in fact, my brother-in-law, who didn't live here, but always had some interest in moving back to the area, was considering it. So everybody got out, everybody looked around the house, and I had hoped to stop the people that were in charge of the open house and the sale of the house and ask some questions. But they weren't here. They had come and unlocked the door and left some paperwork and left. And there were a few other people that came to the open house. In fact, one of the neighbors, who's a really good friend of mine, was here. And that was actually good because her husband works on houses for a living. And he looked around with my husband and noticed that he thought that the structure of the house looked pretty good. And so did my husband, and so did my brother-in-law, and so did another guy that was here as a friend of our neighbors. And so between the four of them, they were all like, hey, I think this house is probably pretty solid. It's not going anywhere. It needs a lot of work, but it's not going anywhere. So that was a really big encouragement as well. So that was my second answer to prayer. The first one was that the house could actually be salvaged. The second one was that my husband came and looked at the house. And that was a big deal. And he was interested, it's an interesting house. I mean, everybody's that's seen the video and has come through definitely walks through and is like, wow, this house it's unique, it's different. And everyone seems to like something about it. Some of them are a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of how much work it needed, but everybody likes the house. So he was interested. So we go home after the open house, and he went, the rain let up and he went back to working in the fields. So my second prayer request was answered, but that certainly didn't buy us a house. So my next prayer request was that I needed to get my husband interested in buying the house. Granted, it was an auction house, and I did have a little bit of money that maybe I could get together to buy a house. But again, I didn't want to buy it without him. Plus, I had no idea how much I would need. So I started praying about it and kept asking him, do you like it? Well, I have interest. I'm interested. Okay, well, at what point, would you live there? Well, that took a few more days. But finally, one morning, he acknowledged that yes, for the right price, he would live there. That was answered prayer number 3, and that's actually a really important piece because we had looked at houses for 10 years and there had only been one other house that he said he would live in, and we didn't buy that one, even though we tried. So this was a big turning point, and of course made me want it even more because I didn't know how long it might be before he said, sure, I'll live in another house. So the next prayer request that I had and a mountain I had to get over was an auction. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of home auctions, and one that's a big one is like a tax auction. And if you've ever heard of those and you're not in an affluent area, probably it's not one to go for. I don't know all the details of a tax auction, but this was not a tax auction. But what I do know is that one time, about 15 years ago, my brother-in-law had gotten interested in a house in town that was on a foreclosure for a sheriff's sale that was essentially a tax auction. And he had come up with a number that he thought that the house was worth. And he went up to the courthouse. Actually, I don't think he ended up going, but he had decided how much it was going. No, he went. Sorry. How much it was going to be. But he got there. And of course, as you may know, if you're a home investor, the bank showed up and bid this outrageous amount because the people still had a mortgage against it. And then it sold for way more than it was worth. And my brother-in-law was very put out and like, why did I waste my time? And why do I have a check? Why did I give any interest in this? Because he was new to the idea and he didn't know. That was back when we were in our 20s. So he'd never bought a house before and he didn't know what he was going on. And so there was definitely concern that that was how this auction was going to be. And I had hoped to talk to someone when we came for the open house, and there was no one to talk to. So I called the phone number on the paper, and I got a voicemail, but there was a lady, and she called me back, and she was very helpful. And the question of the hour, obviously, was, the paper says the opening bid is $100. Well, $101. It's actually said that they would bid $100. And then you had to go above that. I'm like, is that really? Like, if someone were to show up, they can buy it for $101, Yeah, that's it. And I was like, well, does that ever happen? And she's like, I've never had it happen. She's like, usually there's, a number of people that come and they determine essentially what it's worth by how much they bid. Okay. But there's no banks. No, there's no banks involved. Okay. So you have this is the opening bid, and there's nothing hidden. Nope. And she's like, you have seen the house, right? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, because it needs a lot of work. She's probably thinking she's talking to some girl who wants to buy a house and was, getting in over her head. And who knows? It's been a year almost, but maybe I am in over my head, but I hope not. So that obviously was answer to prayer number, what am I up to, 4? The house was salvageable. My husband came to the open house. He would live here, and the house actually would sell for opening bid, that there wasn't a bank involved. Okay, so I'm going to do one more, and then I will pick it up at another story. Okay, so answer to prayer number 5, and I forgot, I said in the last one that there were 5, there's actually 7, my fault on that. So answer to prayer number 5 was that, where are we going to get the money? Now, yes, the house could sell for $100, but more than likely it would sell for a lot more than that. I mean, the house sold for $90-some thousand in 2003, I think. And, Zillow or whatever thought it was still worth $100,000, which we knew it wasn't. But we also, kind of doing a little bit of research, understood that for the right person who could get the right kind of loan, that, they would base the value of the house on it after remodel value as opposed to its current value, and then they would work with them. I think, I'm not a big house investor, but that's the little bit I picked up during the time that I was researching how much money we would need to pay for the house. So the next goal was, how are we going to buy this? How are we going to pay for this house? Okay. So my father-in-law, he likes to buy old houses, not old, but houses, cheap ones, fix them up, rent them out. So we were kind of hoping maybe he might be interested in helping us invest in this particular house. We had some money, but you had to have the balance within 30 days, and we didn't know for sure if we could get a balance of any sort within 30 days, and certainly not, a large sum of money. So I told him to go and talk to his dad and see if he could get, like a temporary loan, or maybe even a longer term loan that he would help us pay. We'd pay him back or whatever, creative financing, because this certainly wasn't the kind of house that you could just go to the bank and get a mortgage against, especially not with our financial situation and not with this particular house. It was going to be a mess. So we figured this would be easier. And so I prayed a lot about that. And funny enough, he comes home later, and from talking to him, he's like, oh, my dad wouldn't talk to me about it. He has no interest. He said it's too big, it's too much work, and he didn't like the house. We didn't want to buy it. Okay. And then he says, but my mom said she would help me. So I hadn't even thought of the fact that she would want to or be able to help, but his mom was all excited about helping us, and she's like, okay, yep, I think I can work out some terms and some ideas, and we can work together, and I can loan you some money to help buy the house. So that was answer to prayer number 5. And I am gonna stop it here because it's already 15 minutes in, and I will pick up in the next story. But so if you're counting, answer to prayers. Number 1, the house was salvageable. Number 2, my husband was willing to go look at it. Number 3, my husband was willing to consider buying it. Number 4, it could actually sell for $100 and there was no banks involved. And number 5, my mother-in-law said that she would help us come up with the balance of financing in 30 days so that we could comfortably go and bid at the auction. So I hope you'll come back and hear story part 3 to see a little bit more about how we bought our house for $101. And if you'd like to see the house, we've got some tours up, and I hope you'll give those a view. Thanks so much for stopping by, guys. God bless and have a great weekend.